So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. May I have an approval of the agenda for this evening?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further? I do have one question, just quickly. Under the action items, Carrie, it says adoption of the findings from Thursday, July 25th, 2024 meeting, continuation of public hearing. Do we need to say anything about the fact that we tentatively denied? Do we need to say denial of and adoption of findings? Or is it okay just to say adoption of findings and those findings say denial?
Saying denial and adoption of findings would be more complete, I think.
Okay.
But I think either way would work. We should have, I think you ought to, I think the motion ought to be, final adoption of findings denying the application or something like that. I think.
Okay, that's how I'll read it then. So are you guys okay with that minor amendment? Under
Yes.
action items? Good?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll have our section for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience or online who would like to come forward with public comment that they believe to be in the purview of the Planning Commission? If you do, please limit your comment to 3 minutes. Robert, I can't see the audience. Is it or
there's nobody here.
Okay.
Nobody here.
Online?
No hands on Zoom.
Okay, then we'll close the public comment and move to action items. This is adoption of findings and denial from Thursday, July 25th, 2024, our July 2024 meeting, continuation of public hearing, CU 2401, Miller Nash LLP on behalf of the Stephanie Inn for a conditional use permit.
So I had a couple of comments
Sure.
as I was rolling through it, both of which they're like 2/3 of the way through the findings, starting at the shoreline stabilization priorities. And then I think probably my first comment would be addressed in the next one after like qualification for beachfront protection. In the findings, it's noted about the dynamic revetments. Oh, geez. I don't remember us discussing specifically the dynamic revetments. We discussed the lesser measures in the priorities, just doing the vegetated, the sand burritos and stuff like that, which the Oregon Parks handbook addresses dynamic revetments separately from that. So I think not including the dynamic revetments in that sentence, I don't think it makes sense for us to include that phrasing, that one sentence phrasing about the dynamic revetments.
Could you point us, I'm sorry, you lost me. I think I'm not keeping up. What section are you looking at again?
That's fine. I kind of spoke in a circle there for a second to start with, but in the section 1780230E1, qualifications, beachfront protections, in the findings, the second paragraph, just eliminating that the example section. For example, installation of dynamic revetments was rejected in the Schlicker report because of the uncertainty and lack of design methodologies for dynamic revetments. And then also removing the next sentence, but this evidence does not explain why a necessary design and engineering could not be done. So then you would just have a less invasive options are not viable. The report also indicates that these type of dynamic revetments, the dynamic revetments require more frequent maintenance. So instead of suggesting that, like, instead of talking about the dynamic revetments at all, since that's the cobblestone beach that they do mention wouldn't be appropriate in the report.
Okay, my turn, Eric. My turn to be behind. I've got us as close as page 5. You said 178230E1.
Yeah, so it's on that page 5.
Yep.
This section about the dynamic revetments in the findings.
Okay, in the findings, going to look for dynamic revetments.
Yeah,
Paragraph 2.
Yeah,
Paragraph 2 of the findings. Okay.
Second sentence.
Yeah, so
For
it's
example.
I think it's the second and third
Okay.
sentences. Sorry, I just thought it was unnecessary explanation about dynamic revetments when that's not something that we really discussed during the meeting.
I think we discussed the fact that the report did not provide evidence that less invasive structural options were not viable. And this is one of the examples, although we didn't call it out, this is exactly what we meant when we said that the report was not providing sufficient evidence that other alternatives were not viable. So
I agree. I agree that that's what we discussed, but not for
Yeah.
dynamic revetments. I thought it was just the vegetated stuff, not
well, no,
the
our point
structural.
was, I disagree. I
Okay.
think that the point of our conversation was not to march through every option that was in that report, but we simply said, we had all read the report. We all noted that this type of example existed within the report where it says, maybe this doesn't work, or maybe we don't know enough as a company about how this works when they, for instance, they don't know the design methodology because that's not what they do. They do riprap, they do foundations. So I think our point wasn't to step through every option, but to say that this report didn't provide substantive evidence that the alternatives absolutely would not work.
Okay. And then, so, I get that now. And then the other one that, the other comment I had was in the previous section, the findings for on the same page, the next findings up. There was a kind of confusing sentence. Let me see if I can find it again. Although the Schlicker report explains why other revetment solutions will not work and that what is proposed will be more sustainable, will be a more sustainable vegetated riprap approach. I feel like I didn't understand where that sentence was going.
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that paragraph. So I would
agree.
imagine it will all need to spend some time on that one, start to finish.
Okay. All right. And those were just my two comments, right off the bat.
I agree with you, Mickey. That's a pretty critical sentence we'll need to spend some time on. Anyone else have areas of concern?
If we go back toward the beginning, maybe we can sort of start at the top, so to speak. My first comment was on 1780-110. Did anyone have anything before that? This is page 3 of the findings.
Nothing before that.
So I find it, I don't think I agree with the very first part of this finding. It says, although the Planning Commission does not dispute the geotechnical report statement that some structure is necessary, we didn't find that a structure was necessary. So I think that's an unnecessary, first, we didn't find it. But second, I don't think it's necessary to the point here about demand existing. So my recommendation would be to delete the first clause beginning although, and delete everything through resulting from wave activity. So we just take all of that out, and we begin the finding with the Planning Commission finds there is insufficient evidence to suggest a replacement structure is needed. So that's my first suggestion in this section.
So let me read that if I've got it right here. So the new findings would be the Planning Commission and this is my own process, Mickey. I know you just did it. This is just my own way of kind
No
of
problem.
processing, I guess, if you will. Finding the Planning Commission finds that there's insufficient evidence to suggest that a replacement structure is needed at this time. Although the Planning Commission noted the finding that several undersized armor stones had become dislodged from the revetment, there was no evidence suggesting that these dislodged stones were tantamount to failure of the existing. Okay, yeah, I like that.
And I think finally, the very last sentence, it says, therefore, the Planning Commission questions to what degree a demand exists. I think we find that there is no evidence to suggest a demand exists because we are making findings, we're not making questions.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
So how would that, therefore the planning commission finds,
There is no evidence to suggest a demand exists.
I'd even take out to suggest. There's no evidence.
You're right, yeah.
can I have a quick pause here? How are we recording these changes? Robert, are you grabbing these and going to send them to me? I know we're rushed on time and this is the sort of thing I'm going to be signing, presume tonight or tomorrow morning.
Yeah, that's what's taking. This is Steve. Oh, go ahead, Carrie.
Sorry, I'm typing them in real time. I can
Okay.
email them to whoever.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, I'm sorry to have interrupted. Go ahead, Nikki. Or Aaron.
So with Aaron's change, it would be therefore the planning commission finds that there's no evidence a demand exists for this new stabilizing structure at this time.
And Carrie, this is your world. So if we're missing something, is it inappropriate for you to speak up or for us to ask you to weigh in?
I will weigh in. Well, I will weigh in if I'm nervous, but I think everything you've identified right now is fine. I took the first shot at drafting these, and what I was trying to do was acknowledge what's in the record as part of this. So I was saying that these things exist, but the planning commission found them unreliable, or the planning commission didn't rely on them, or found them incomplete or insufficient. So that's why you might see a lot of this. Although this happened, I wanted to point out what the evidence was. So, but I'll let you know if I have a problem.
Great.
If you want to keep that in, could we simply say, although the HG Slicker and Associates geotechnical report states some form of structure is necessary, the planning commission finds?
It's fine. It's fine the way it is. What you've taken out is okay.
Anyone else? I have a minor comment under that same section F, the last section of the finding. The planning commission agrees that there are other hard armored protective structures in the vicinity. Do we need that sentence?
If we do keep it, I think we would have to say we found that there are both properties with armored structures and those without in the vicinity. Because although Ocean Lodge to the south has it, there's properties to the north that don't have riprap. So we would have to be balanced if we were to include that.
My preference,
I didn't realize there weren't ones without there.
Yeah.
I mean, the standard is compatibility. That's what the standard is. So it would imply that you're looking at, compatible revetments in the area.
So I think it would be inappropriate to leave the impression that we think riprap is the dominant because it's not dominant along Cannon Beach's beachfront.
There is a mixture. Anything from nothing all the way up to seawalls.
Right. So we could state that we agree that there are a variety of beachfront stabilization systems in use in the vicinity.
how's that sound, Carrie?
Good. And okay, what did we follow that up with? The planning commission agrees that there are a variety of beachfront stabilization measures in use in the vicinity. And therefore, a hard armored solution is not necessary to achieve compatibility.
Yes.
Okay,
Any other comments around there or? I had mentioned earlier 1780-230, the shoreline stabilization priority. I had some issues with. I don't, other people had mentioned that too. Mickey, I don't know if you want to go first. You want me to go first?
Yeah, I think I would start with a sort of a global. How are we really thinking about this section? It begins by discussing replacement. My impression of our conversation was, yes, we had a question about whether or not this was necessary to be replaced. But ultimately, the real question is they are coming to the Planning Commission with a new proposal for a new structure. So they still have to meet the stabilization priorities for that new structure, somewhat independent of the repair question. So it seems to me that what we have before us is not an application for repair, although it's being justified on the basis of repair. The fact that they have a failing structure there is not part of what we're considering. What we are considering is there's a new application for a new structure. Yes, there's there's a condition on site that we could discuss, but that's not part of what the code is asking in this section. The code here isn't saying, are you doing a repair or are you doing a new structure? It's like this application was for a new structure, not for a repair. So in that case, the focus for me was going through this priority system and whether they had provided evidence that indeed none of the higher priority options would work.
Mickey, that goes right along with, I think what a couple main changes were go right along with what you're saying there. The one that stood out the most for me, Carrie, was that last sentence. I would actually replace that. I wrote this language, so let's talk it out maybe before adopting it. But so instead of having the last sentence read without greater explanation for why the additional maintenance of the existing solution will not work, the Planning Commission finds this criteria is not satisfied. Instead of having that sentence, I wrote the existing revetment, although in disrepair from a lack of maintenance, is currently protecting the shoreline, and the applicant has failed to support the need for a more armored revetment.
you're gonna have to read it again so I can
Sure.
capture it.
Okay, the existing revetment,
Yep.
although in disrepair from a lack of maintenance,
Mm-hmm.
is currently protecting the shoreline, and the applicant has failed to support the need for a more armored revetment.
Failed to provide what?
Failed to provide support,
For a more armored revetment.
yes.
Like that sentence, Clay.
Great. Everyone, how do other people feel about it? Good? Okay.
I had a question about a middle part of this findings too, but I'll let you go first, Clay.
Okay. The sentence just before that, so second to last sentence, I'd like it to end with, so after the word approach,
Mm-hmm.
that will also need to be maintained. Or that would also need to be maintained.
Okay.
Mickey, you want to?
Yeah, I think I actually have two sentences here that I have questions about. So the sentence that begins, the planning commission understands that review of any repair of the existing revetment is necessary, but finds perhaps this could be accomplished through proper maintenance. Perry, I'll ask you, since you wrote this, when you were saying understands that review of any repair of the revetment is necessary, do you mean that it would be subject to planning commission review? Okay.
I think the idea is that there are boulders that are loose, or there are pieces of this that are loose. My understanding is picking those up and taking them out or somehow gluing them back down requires review, because that would be maintenance of the revetment. So there would need to be some review, but that would be a question for Robert and Steve.
Correct. So maintenance is covered by a development permit. So that doesn't need to go in front of the planning commission, but a replacement, which is effectively, putting in a new structure or altering an existing structure to the point that it would effectively become a new structure, that would be a conditional use. Because this isn't simply rearranging a handful of loose rocks that got dislodged.
Okay.
So maybe that sentence isn't necessary, since we wouldn't be reviewing if they elected to attempt repair.
And Mike raised his hand.
Hi, this might not be relevant, but I thought they, Robert or Stephen, you said that, or perhaps it was even Will said, the structure can't be repaired. I don't know why we're even talking about it. It was the applicant who made that assertion, not anybody else.
Yeah, our opinion, when myself and OPRD went and visited it, we came away with the opinion that a repair would effectively be a new structure.
Right, so I think what we discussed at the meeting was that what they mean by it can't be repaired is that it couldn't fall under OPRD's rules that for a simplified permitting process to do repair.
Okay.
That they would have enough work to do that they needed to do the full application process.
But does that make a difference anywhere in the text? We're going through this.
No.
And I may not, but we're going through this paragraph and repairs keep coming up. So I just wondered.
I suppose the only reason the repair is helpful here is to explain why this is a new application for a new structure.
Okay.
Because it sounds like if it was just a repair job, it would just go to planning for a development permit.
Thank you.
So I'm concerned about the next sentence that reads, although the Schlicker report explains why other replacement solutions will not work and that what is proposed will be more sustainable, the report does not identify efforts taken to maintain the existing revetment. I think the real issue was that we did not find that they explained with enough evidence why the other replacement solutions will not work. So I would take this sentence out, or at least delete that first part. However, there's a great sentence down below under 1780-230E1, second paragraph of findings, last sentence. I think this is very accurate. It says, although the Schlicker report discusses why other alternatives are not preferred, there's no affirmative statement unless armored solution would not work. That is, I think, really the point that we want up in 1780-230D1.
Yeah, that's a clean substitution.
Okay, so you want the last sentence in the second paragraph of E1 that's at the bottom of page 5, at least in my edited draft right now, to replace what is the third sentence in the former finding.
also beginning with although.
Yep,
Because when I think about this particular section, 1780-230 D1, we need to make a finding here that the other priority options are not viable. And so that's why I like this sentence where we are not saying it's not workable. In fact, we're saying the report simply says they weren't preferred, because that is really how the report reads. It reads like, well, the sandbags fall apart after 5 years, or we don't know the methodology for something else. So our whole finding here is that there was not enough evidence in that HGS report that actually indicated that the other options will not.
okay, so where this leaves us is, do you want me to read what I have?
That'd be
Sure.
great.
Or do you have more to add before I read what I have?
I don't have anything further in that paragraph.
Okay, I'm gonna read it sentence, I've sort of separated the sentences so we can talk about each one. Opening, the Schlicker report asserts that the existing revetment is in a state of disrepair, noting the existence of several undersized armor stones that were scattered in the back beach area. What is not clear is why a handful of loose stones demands a wholesale replacement of the existing revetment. The Planning Commission understands that review of any repair of the existing revetment is necessary, or how about maybe necessary? Maybe necessary, but finds that perhaps this could be accomplished through proper maintenance rather than full-scale replacement. And the reason why I'm talking about proper maintenance is because that's option A in the priority scheme.
Mhm.
Okay, third idea, although the Schlicker report discusses why other alternatives are not preferred, there is no affirmative statement that a less armored solution will not work, regardless of whether a new vegetated riprap revetment is the solution most preferred by this applicant.
Yes.
The geotechnical report does not identify the efforts taken to maintain the existing revetment, and the commission feels that it cannot reward this lack of maintenance with a further armored approach that would also need to be maintained. The existing revetment, although in disrepair from lack of maintenance, is currently supporting the shoreline, and the applicant has failed to provide support for a more armored revetment.
I'd like to take out the word feels. I don't think our feelings matter. I think fines could potentially be a replacement, but I'm not happy with feels.
Sure. It's sometimes hard when you write these a lot to find other words that are something other than fines. But sure. Okay. Feels is replaced with fines.
Okay.
Or
I think
take it
that's great.
completely and say the commission cannot reward.
I'm good with that too.
Yeah. Okay, other sections people like to discuss or make changes, see changes made to?
So I'm in 1780-230 E1. End of very first paragraph. Planning Commission is troubled by the lack of a third party disinterested but qualified evaluation. I would like to somehow include here part of our discussion, which was that this particular company specializes in riprap and structured revetments and doesn't have experience in the other options. So I think that's what you meant by qualified, Carrie, but I would like to be really explicit that they don't possess the necessary expertise to evaluate some of the alternatives.
Would that be they don't possess the necessary, or they have a bias or
Not even a bias. I think that they literally, I mean, from some of the statements in the report, it appeared they just didn't know the methodologies behind some of the
okay,
alternatives.
But
So
do they
there's-
say, I mean, is there some kind of bio or explanation of their experience in the materials from which you glean that information?
I want to see at the beginning of the report, I think that. Let me see if there's a bio there.
I mean, I'm not disputing that it's true. I just would like
Yeah,
to.
where we point to for that, I understand completely. Let's see. I feel like often there's a bio at the start, but maybe it's at the end too. Sorry, it's hard to scroll through these things quickly.
Well, it's lengthy, I understand.
Lengthy. Thinks a package is 1,000 pages, man. That's a tree in and of itself. Not the one packet, the whole thing last Thursday.
And just to interject, we have about 20 minutes remaining.
Okay.
We do have to clear the room before 5 o'clock. City Council is having an exec session at 5.
I think we're pretty close here, though.
Yeah, I think so. I have the table of contents, so I'm hoping that that'll get me where we need to go.
Let me just throw out, it may not be relevant, that I went to their website where they've got a fairly extensive set of documentation of the kinds of work they do, and they do not list anything that would be considered less than an armored approach.
I understand that, but that information needs to be in the record.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a bio here. I think I was mostly gleaning that from the comments about the alternatives and that they didn't know the methodologies that would be applied for them. So perhaps we don't have the ability based on the record to be as exact as I suggested.
Well, if you considered it as a part of your analysis last
Yeah.
Thursday, I think it's fair. Although, I actually highlighted that sentence too. I don't know why it's there. Yes, we do have that question, but and maybe there's an important reason for it to be there, Carrie, but to me, we have this with trees and wetlands, and this is something we've talked about a bunch on other projects as well. My concern in having it there is like, well, is your process flawed? Because we've done that. You asked for this, we've given it. What do you want us to do?
Well, I mean, the reason why I put it in there was because I think that your deliberation suggested that perhaps Schlicker was not as qualified as did not provide you the quality evidence that you would need to find in their favor, clearly. So, that was kind of what I was pointing out, was that although Schlicker may be qualified in certain things, he's not qualified enough, perhaps.
It's interesting.
I can't, and I also wanted to sort of reflect the commission's concern or interest in, or open the door to the city retaining these kind of experts on the city's behalf in the future, or perhaps an applicant gets another expert on this, on these other types of solutions, right?
It's interesting, Carrie. I have a very different interpretation of that sentence just listening to you, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And it's the first thing that came to me is comma after disinterested. It's the silliest thing and a nitpicky thing, and I might be wrong even. But for me, it resonates differently when I pause after disinterested.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm not trying to argue a point. I
No,
was
I
just
think it's,
trying to
I'm
give
glad
you
you
some
said it.
explanation.
I highlighted it with at first going it, let's get rid of it, and certainly I had questions about it. Why is it in there? And now with your explanation, I understand, and I like it because of that.
I'm fine keeping it in as is. I think it was an important part of the deliberation, and Gary, you're right. We would love to see the city able to retain their own expert.
Were there other changes or concerns people wanted to bring up?
My one question would be if we're moving the sentence from the end of paragraph 2 of 1780-230E1, are we just repeating it in both places, or do we need to do something new at the end of 1780-230E1 paragraph 2?
I kept it in both places because
That's
I
fine
think
with me.
I think if you like the sentence, if you think it accurately reflects how you consider the criteria, I think it's fine to keep it both places.
I'm good with that also. Anything else?
I guess my last comment would be related to vegetation. We did discuss at the meeting the fact that there was so much vegetation on the riprap that HG Associates in their report said they couldn't really assess what was underneath. They could see the loose stones, but they said there's too much vegetation to assess the structure. I think that goes a little bit to the question about what state it's in, that there wasn't evidence on that. But it also goes a little bit to the fact that there is riparian vegetation there currently. This is a vegetated structure right now. So I'm just wondering, is that worth including explicitly somewhere in the findings, or is that just not important?
My reading of the discussion about what's there now, the only part I really focused on is that part that talks about it being in a state of disrepair, and it says that the vegetation is trimmed or cut or something like that. And
there's also a sentence, there's a different sentence than that. So let me find it and I can read it to you. I made notes about
it. I don't think, you know, if it's important to you, I'm happy to put it in. I don't think it's critical because I think that the point is that there's lack of explanation of the state of disrepair. Whether that's buttressed by your point about lack of maintained vegetation, we can put that in or we can leave it out, whichever you want.
I think my point of bringing it in is twofold. One is it points out how little analysis could actually be done of the current structure.
Okay.
So because the point of the vegetation part was that it actually reads, however, the vegetation's presence limited our observations of the condition of the revetment. So that automatically tells us the data that we're relying on is limited about the current status. But also one of the priorities is one of the preferred options is a vegetated stabilization structure. This does have vegetation, it's working.
Okay, what I've added to I've added a new sentence under D1. It says the Schlicker report notes that the presence of vegetation limits an evaluation of the condition of the revetment.
Yes. I specifically said observations, evaluation or observations, probably okay.
Okay, and then I added and then I said, this limits the ability to assess the structure. And it does show that this resource has vegetation that is working. And then it would, and then it says, and then then it would go on to say, what is not clear is why a handful of loose stones demands wholesale replacement of the existing revetment. Do you want that there, or do you want it somewhere else? Did you want it in the, did you want these two sentences to go somewhere else?
I don't think I have a preference, so if it sounds right to you, I'm fine with it. Anyone else?
It sounds good.
Are you adding that new sentence to be the first sentence of that paragraph, and then you'll continue on to those, bump those next two sentences to sentence 2 and 3?
No, what I added were, so in response to D1, it will open with, the Schlicker report asserts that the existing revetment is in a state of disrepair, noting the existence of several undersized armor stones that were scattered in the back beach area. What is not clear is why a handful of loose stones demands wholesale replacement of the existing revetment. The Schlicker report notes the presence of vegetation, notes the vegetation of the presence of vegetation. Sorry, let me start that sentence again. I screwed that up. The Schlicker report notes the presence of vegetation limits an evaluation or observation of the condition of the revetment. That this limits the ability to assess the structure, and it does show that the resource has vegetation that is working. Then it goes on to say the Planning Commission understands that review of any repair may be necessary. So then it goes on the way we talked about before.
Okay, I just wasn't clear which sentence it was falling in between, but I got it. Thank you.
I think that reads well.
So I have one final statement on the last page. I'm hoping we can do this quickly, Robert and Steve. For 178230L, we talk about replacement not necessarily being necessary, but I feel as though once again here, we should comment that there is no evidence that less, what we call it, intrusive structures would not be adequate. That would be before the sentence that begins until this evidence is provided. Because here's my thinking on this. If they come back and say, well, it can't be repaired or maintained at this time, our point is, if it can't be repaired or maintained, they still need to show us that another one of the priority options, that all of the priority options are not viable. And that evidence is not in the record.
Wouldn't they also need to show us that it's not doing its job?
There's not doing its job. They would need to show that none of the other priority options are viable. And so I'm worried that if we focus too much on the repair replace question, we miss the point that we didn't have evidence before us to find that even in the event of replacement, another option was not adequate.
Okay, so can I read you what I've got?
Please.
Again, the Planning Commission finds that the Schlicker report expresses a bias toward full-scale replacement of the existing revetment when there is no evidence that the wholesale replacement is necessary at this time, and that all efforts to maintain and extend the life of the existing revetment have been exhausted. More aggressive maintenance might allow for a less invasive solution. No evidence of less intrusive structures are not, wait, that's not gonna work. There is no evidence that less intrusive structures are not viable. Does that make sense? There is no evidence that less intrusive structures are not viable.
Guessing the word intrusive is wrong, and for some reason I'm having a blank on what we might
Impactful.
want to use instead.
Less
Impactful.
Less
armored,
armored, less armored.
Let's do less armored.
there's no evidence that less armored structures are not viable. Until this evidence is provided, the planning commission cannot conclude that a new vegetated revetment is the minimum effort necessary to protect the structure. This criterion is not satisfied.
Yes, thanks.
Going once, twice. Anybody else? Okay. I think we have some really good findings there. May I have a motion to approve the findings as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Mike, you're muted. Was that a second?
Second,
Okay, any further discussion? Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Moritz,
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates,
yes.
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. The conditional use permit is formally denied and the findings of fact are adopted. Robert, when will you be sending this to me for signature?
Once we get a copy of the revised findings, we'll get that and a PDF prepared and send that over to you via DocuSign.
So I'm stepping into a meeting here in a little time, you know that. Is this a tonight thing or is it a tomorrow morning thing? I can cover it either way. I just want to make sure I'm not missing.
Tomorrow will be fine.
Okay.
Most likely tomorrow.
Just want to thank Carrie for her help on this, Tessa and
Yes.
Robert for getting the agenda together and for everyone being able to make it today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. No, this was a lot of work to get to where we are. I think we did a really good job with a really tough decision here. Thank you.
And Steve and Robert, I just sent you the findings.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all your help.
All right. Have a great
Thanks,
day,
Carrie.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.